What's your best "fire me, I frickin' dare you" moment from work? Not me, but my dad. So he was delivering catering to an office one day and the receptionist obviously screwed up. She was yelling at him in front of her bosses saying that he was too late on time with proof, and that the order was wrong when it wasn't. She was making such a big issue of it, and then said she was going to report him to his manager and get him fired. So my dad said, "See if I care," and gave her the number. She called and my dad picked up because, oh, he's not the manager, but the owner. Everyone in that room was laughing at her. Story 2. Over the first year I worked there, I essentially took over most of the tasks in my department which were previously held by other departments, and was done badly because of it. This led to a massive increase in productivity. I then found out I was paid significantly less than what others were making, and others in my position across the industry were making. So I go to my boss and tell them I had done all this work increasing productivity and I would like to discuss a raise. They said no. So I worked there for another year, asking for a raise every now and then until I was offered a job that paid double. It didn't start for a couple of months, so I held on to that job until I was set to submit my 2 weeks. I asked for a raise again, thinking, hell, why not? My boss goes off, tells me I won't get a raise, and says some very colorful things about it. It culminated with her telling me, "If you don't like your pay, maybe we should evaluate your future at this company." To which I replied, already have. I took another job and this was your last chance to offer me what I deserve. I quit and walked out of the office. Friends told me that my sudden departure caused a massive backup of work that ended with my manager being fired for it. The position of power OP must have been in and must have felt, beautiful. Like, I have a way better offer. I have nothing to lose. Give me a raise. Let's see what happens. That manager sounds, pretty awful. And OP, I'm glad you found a job that paid your worth. Story 3. Told my boss 2 weeks in advance I was taking PTO on Monday and Tuesday. She approved it, no problem. I take the days off and went out of town for a school thing. I come back into the office on Wednesday and I'm locked out of my account. I talked to the operations manager, my boss's boss, who was the person who interviewed and hired me to see what's going on. He told me that my boss said I disappeared and didn't contact anybody for 2 days. I explained it to him and he said, no problem. I talked to my boss later in the afternoon and she is furious. Starts saying how I didn't tell anybody I was taking PTO and thought I just suddenly quit. Like, I don't know what the hell this girl was talking about, because I told her 2 weeks ago that I was going to be out for those 2 days, and I have emails to prove it. At this point, I was the only person left on my team of 4 people who were there when I was hired. I was already planning on quitting next month, as I had to move for school. She had the audacity to threaten to fire me. I said, if you feel like you need to let me go for your mistake, go ahead. Ended up working there for another 7 weeks before leaving on my terms. Even got to use the operations manager as a reference for another job. Story 4. I used to work at a small family-owned grocery store for a few years. We got our load in on Mondays and Thursdays. And we got passed over one Monday and the distributor said we'd get the missing load in on Thursday. So what essentially happened was there was a double load, and my 2 receiving partners were out sick. I was the only person in the warehouse/receiving at the time, and I got to take on 15 plus pallets of groceries that needed to hit the shelves immediately. I was specifically told not to go up front, and to do what I could, while the front end crew covered the aisles and cash registers. Well, a lot of them were either lazy, untrained, or just putting in their hours so they could pay bills. I put in my earbud, just one, and got to work. I'm halfway through checking in pallets when I get called up front, so I ignore it and continue. Then I get called up again. So I head up there and get yelled at by a new hire with a bad attitude to do your job and bag for me. The customer was a regular and we got along very well. She told me, it was fine, I can bag my own groceries. Between the customer and the fact that I wasn't having it, I walked away. I had 3 years and 2 ranks on her, so I didn't give half of a crap, and went back to my pallets. Then I get the newest hotshot manager who replaced the old hotshot manager who replaced the beloved manager who trained basically the whole store in my face about having an earbud in on the clock, which is allowed, by the way, as long as you have one ear free, and said I could be sent home and not come back if I wanted to listen to music. So I gestured to the pallets and said, go for it. These all need to be checked in and broken down. Have fun. I got to keep my earbud in, so I had that going for me, which was nice. Story 5. Put in my 2 weeks at my wildly understaffed job. 6 days later, I got sick. I call around and see if anyone can take my shift and no one is available. Tried to call out that morning. Crappy manager tries to persuade me to come in even though I am barfing everywhere. I non-committally agree to call in later in the day to see if I'm feeling up to coming in. Call back, say, I'm still sick and won't be coming. Manager blows up at me in front of customers being rude as hell. Eventually asks what I expect to do about the shift needing to be covered. I say I've done everything I'm required to, and it sounds like a management problem to me. Hung up and turned my phone off. Story 6. Important note. My usual job was 3 a.m. to noon, and I was sleeping from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. A split shift meant working 4:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. and coming back to 7 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. if I remember right. I had been working a series of split shifts, and the wacky sleep schedule was really getting to me. I was told I would only need to do it 3 days in a row, but then it became 4 days. And then finally I went to sleep after the 4th shift, got woken up to my boss calling me and telling me I would have to work one more split shift. I told him no, and that I would come in for my usual schedule. He started to argue with me and asking me why it was a big deal, especially since I had worked it almost every day this week, so why not work one more? When I explained I was having issues with sleep and I wouldn't come in, he was like, "But it's your job. I'm scheduling you for another split shift." And I just yelled at him, "Then I don't need this job." He started apologizing and that he would let me get some sleep. I hung up. I went to work the next morning for my usual split, and everyone there was surprised to see me. My boss had told everyone he thought I might not show up at all, and wasn't sure if I'd quit. I worked my usual shift. My boss came in at 8 a.m. and began apologizing right away when he saw me. Then he said, "If working a split was so hard on you, you could have just told me no." I just turned and went to lunch. I was so hopeful that the boss had figured it out and just was like, "Oh, my bad, man. I was too harsh on you. That was unfair." Nope. Had to turn it around and get defensive at the end. "You could just told me no, man." It's such a common thing when you're like apologizing but not really. Get out of here with that. Either apologize or don't. Story 7. When I was 17, I worked a summer holiday job at Pizza Hut. I had transferred to my hometown restaurant from my university town restaurant. I was there for 5 weeks and hadn't been paid yet. The jerk boss claimed it was because I gave him the wrong employee number and I hadn't. Anyway, after 5 weeks of no pay, I rang him on New Year's Eve, i.e. busiest night of the summer, and said I wasn't coming into work because I wasn't a volunteer, and I'm not going to work for free. He told me if I didn't go to work, I may as well not come back as I would be fired. I didn't go to work and had a fun New Year's instead. Then a few days later I called the employment tribunal, I'm in New Zealand, and told them what had happened. They called my jerk boss, and then he called me. He offered me my job back and was nice as pie for the rest of the summer. Hearing New Year's Eve in the middle of the summer, I thought I read it wrong. Nope, Southern Hemisphere exists. My bad. Story 8. I was in the military and was trying to take my vacation time before I lost the days. They denied my requests 4 different times, and I hadn't had a day off in 3 months, and I was working 12 to 16-hour shifts most days. I was beyond done. I was teaching some new guys part of the tasks for one job. Everything was fine. I went somewhere else in the hangar to do something else on the plane. This quality assurance guy that everyone knew was a pain came in. I did my stuff well and he never bothered me, so I didn't pay him any attention. He started talking to one of the new dudes. He then asked me why I hadn't told the new guy about some super obscure caution about water under a grate in the hangar floor. Something that had nothing to do with our job, so it didn't matter. He was just being a pain. I was over the job and him, so I told him, "Listen, Sergeant QA, I've been denied my leave 4 separate times and I've been working for 3 months straight. So, if you have a problem with the way I taught them, then write me up. I don't give a frick. And you can stuff it up your butt, too." Tell my boss I said that. It was a little extreme, but I was pushed to the point. When I went back in, I knew I was in deep, because the guy walked out of my shop head office and I got called right in. When I went in, the shop head said, "I heard what happened out there. Submit the days you want to take leave right now and I'll approve them for you." Then told me I could leave. That's all I heard about it, and I was shocked. Story 9. I worked at Burger King as a teenager. One day, the assistant manager who illegally brought her teenage daughter to work to help her out asked me to clean the restrooms. It wasn't my normal job, but I didn't mind. I had a good attitude about it and prepared to go clean the bathrooms. I walked into the men's room and discovered that the reason she asked me to do it was because someone crapped all over it. Smeared crap on the walls, the sink, the floor, the outside of the toilet. The toilet itself was clogged and hand wet, used toilet paper inside of it, and all over the room. It was a complete disaster. I walked out of the bathroom, went back to the kitchen and told the assistant manager, "I'm not cleaning that. You can fire me, but I'm not cleaning it." She sighed heavily and went and got a mop. Okay, but like a little bit of respect for the assistant manager here. Didn't freak out, didn't make OP do it or fire them or whatever, just was like, yeah, fair enough, and went to do it herself. I do have respect for that. Story 10. Recently, I was working at a concert. The management at this site was trash and never gave us any orders. They just expected people who rarely worked there to inherently know when to stop letting people in, when to kick people out, who was allowed in and who wasn't, etc. Well, another guard and I let one girl in who said she was with her boyfriend who worked with the people who set up the concert. Supervisor was there with a couple of other supervisors and they laughed and called us lemons. Other guard didn't know what it meant, but before the supervisor could say anything, I said, "A lemon is a car that doesn't work." He's saying we're bad at our jobs. He's saying that because blaming us for him being a bad leader is easier than admitting he didn't do his job correctly and helping us be better. Oh, things got real frickin' quiet after that. I'm 5'2" and the supervisor had at least 4 or 5 inches on me. He got really close to my face and said, "I didn't quite hear what you said. Could you repeat it?" So I craned my head up at him and cleared my throat. I said, "A lemon is a car that doesn't work." He's saying that because blaming us for him being a bad leader is easier than admitting he didn't do his job correctly and helping us be better. He said he'd tell the home office that I was fired. I said, yeah, okay, see you tomorrow. See, what he didn't know was that home office loves me. I am the single most reliable guy they have. I show up hours early to a job, always willing to stay late if needed, and usually pick up last-minute shifts. On top of that, they've never had a single complaint about me. Until that night, at least. Don't know if he ever did call the office because no one ever said a word to me about it. He scowled when he saw me the next day and didn't say a word to me. I'm going to assume the office didn't believe him when he called in. Story 11. Worked for a newspaper, editing and actually putting the paper together. Arranging it all, placing stories and pictures where they needed to be, titling, quoting, and sourcing everything. I was a one-man team and used an overly complicated system that I figured out how to use really effectively. They treated me like crap, set impossible deadlines, and berated me for not meeting them. One day, the boss tells me to fully put a paper done by the end of the day. Gave me no warning. I had no articles from the journalists and no photos from the photographers. It was my job to collect it all from everyone, and he wants me to do it in a single day. I told him no. If he wants it done, he has to give me more time. He tells me, if you don't have it done by the end of the day, you're fired. I tell him this paper can't function without me. He tells me I need to take the day off and cool your temper. And he'll do my job for me, apparently. Get a call an hour after I get home that he needs me to come in and do it, and I can have as much time as I need. I promptly quit on that jerk. Screw your crappy newspaper. Story 12. Nobody so far has given an example of when they did it and actually got fired, so I will. But some details are changed, obviously. I worked at a terrible retail boutique in college. Worked my way up to management. Their pay policies were illegal, and the idiot district director they hired staffed terribly. I worked open to close by myself multiple times. I finally locked up in the middle of the day to go take a break once. Got caught. Told if I did it again, I would be fired. I said, stop staffing so crappily. They did it again. I locked up again and a customer called corporate. I was fired. Last laugh was on them though because I threatened to sue them for violating employment law. Sure did. Class action. Multi-million-dollar settlement getting back lost wages for 1,000 plus employees across multiple states, plus unemployment for me. Actually what led to a complete life change for me. And I wouldn't be as successful now had I just let them continue to abuse me. Short-term financial pain and scary when you don't know how you'll afford food or how to pay bills. Made it through and it was definitely worth it. Not only for me, but a lot of people benefited. Screw you, you piece of crap. You don't deserve to still be in business. Story 13. I've been at the company for a long time. Therefore, I know both the day and night shift duties in and out. I'm well liked by our clients and in charge of training the new recruits. Most work for us up to 6 to 12 months before growing tired of the workload or finding they can't handle the job or just wanting cash enough to study up for something else. Anyway, they are heavily dependent on me. My closest boss threatened to fire me for being home one day and drinking beer when I was supposed to be at work. 2 weeks prior, I had agreed to do overtime, but I wanted a new schedule so I wouldn't miss it. I got a new schedule, but she had forgotten to fill in that day. She blamed me for it anyway and said it was grounds for terminating my contract. Oh, I dared her to do it. Just see how long you would stay in business. Story 14. Had a big staff meeting to plan for the upcoming year about holidays and such, so we could have the appropriately trained people on site to cover the guys that would be away. In the meeting, I say to the owner, so do you want us to email you or the scheduler about this directly? He says, both. So I say, okay, I'll email it in, but I will be gone for 2 weeks, and I tell him the date. He says that it's approved, but email it in. So I email it to him, the scheduler, and my foreman at the time. My holidays come, and on the last day, I send my foreman a message, the usual. Where are we? How's it gone? Where's my company truck? Who do I need to pick up tomorrow? The whole 9 yards. He fires back with, you didn't tell me you were taking days off. I'm going to suspend you without pay for 2 weeks. Well, as you can imagine, that didn't go well. I politely told him he could go screw himself, and that I had the emails, and he was in the room when we discussed the exact dates I would be gone, and that his lack of planning wasn't my fault at all. So I phoned the owner, who I'd happened to work for 7 years at this point, being the second longest employed person there, and told him that the 3 of us would be having a meeting in the morning to sort it out. So I write up my resignation and take it with me along with my company phone, credit card, and keys to the meeting, where the owner proceeds to fire the foreman after about 5 minutes. and gives me the job as foreman for the crews. Thanked me for bringing it to his attention as it had happened before, and being the most knowledgeable person about our product and equipment, he gave me the job, which I held for the next 5 years, until I destroyed my back and had to move on. Story 15. For the past few years, I've worked at one of the nicer restaurants in my small beach town. I'm one of the only servers there who cares about actually doing a good job, and I'm the only one there who doesn't take a smoke break every 15 minutes. This past summer, a new, very illegal rule was implemented that if we mess up an order in any way, we would be liable to pay for that messed up food. I usually didn't have a problem with mess-ups, so I didn't bring up the legality of this matter, since I make good money and didn't want to start fires in places that didn't concern me. That was until I rang in a cherry-glazed burger instead of a cherry-glazed steak, each stylized CGB and CGS in our crappy system. I fixed this with the kitchen, but not before they actually started the burger already. I told my manager, and she just gave me a disappointed look and told me, "Oh, the rules are rules." I then dived into both federal and state workers' rights code and told her she would never see me again if I found any money out of my tips at the end of the night. Never had a problem fixing an order again. Potentially unpopular opinion here, but I think OP should have brought it up before this happened still. Like, if it's illegal or suspicious in any way, you should still say something even if it doesn't directly affect you. It's kind of starting a fire where it doesn't concern you, but it's also just like standing up for your coworkers. And standing up for your coworkers will also stand up for you when it matters, like here. Doing this to only benefit yourself when it matters for you is not a great look, in my opinion. Story 16. Working in an important political building. Been there for about a year. Other employees have been there for decades. 99% of the staff is black, including myself. None of us have ever been written up. New manager shows up, an older white lady with a complex, and starts berating people for not doing their jobs, when they are very clearly doing their jobs as the job is defined. She berates people until they backtalk and then fires them for insubordination. She fires 10 out of 13 people, all black, and replaces them with white workers. She approaches me and begins berating me. I'm on to what she's doing, I don't react. My lack of reaction leads her to tell me I'm being insubordinate, and I'm fired. That was my I frickin' dare you moment, although I didn't say it. She fired me. 6 months later, she's been fired, her supervisor is fired, and his supervisor has been demoted to the worst position a supervisor can have. A lawsuit has been filed that resulted in about $100,000 in damages to the victims. Bet she won't do that crap again. Story 17. I worked at an unspecified telecom a few years ago. I was a senior manager in charge of programming, third-level support, and production support. A business unit bullied through code changes made by the business side through a side deal with a legacy programmer in the data center, circumventing my team, QA, and production testing that just had to get implemented immediately without going through any testing at all. I refused. The CIO overruled me. 72 hours later, phone activations had ground to a halt. Customers nationwide were screaming, and the CIO called phone conference after phone conference, demanding timelines for when I was going to get it fixed. He kept screaming to have members of my team to get on the phone and explain themselves to him. I refused. Finally, I snapped. I told him if he wanted me to fix his mistake, I would need to get off the phone to go work with my teams. And the only reason they hadn't walked out yet was I was keeping him off of them. But we would all happily go together. 24-ish hours later, QA and my team had the BS cleaned up and fixed for a clean rollout. This was all to avoid a 24-hour delay for QA and production testing. I wish I could say that this was the only or worst time, but it's not. Story 18. Worked for Radio Shack and always butted heads with the district manager. He wanted me to use these ridiculous sales techniques that might work in a big city but were really pushy. The year he became our DM, I won a contest for best salesman in the whole company out of about, 14,000 employees. And I did it without being pushy and forcing stuff. He still tried to get me to use these ridiculous techniques each month when he would visit. But after I won the contest, I stopped sugarcoating it and would flat out tell him, "That's stupid, man. I'm not gonna do it that way." Story 19. I worked 50 plus hours a week. I went out of my way to make sure they were set when I went on maternity leave, doing a lot of my work in advance and training my replacement for 2 weeks. I was the director's assistant, but essentially I did the entire position. He was often in the field, and much of this consisted of observing. I broke my back for this company, often going in on days off or getting out long after my shift ended. I used my car and gas with no compensation. I took company calls outside of work and off the clock. Well, I went into labor, went into work to wrap things up, and finished out an 8-hour day. Before I went home to get ready for the hospital, I was beyond a team player. A month to the date out on maternity leave, I was contacted by my employer, asking me to return from maternity leave. I still had 2 months of leave left, and the company doesn't provide insurance for the time, so this time was out of my pocket. I stated I couldn't, as I had complications and medical procedures coming up. I was told a few days later the amount of work that came up and my declining to return 2 months early left them no choice but to hire for my position. I knew my rights, so I wasn't worried. I took the remainder of my leave. When I returned, they gave me only 2 4-hour shifts a week. Work was 15 miles outside city limits, so I was essentially working for a babysitter and gas. I complied because I was painfully aware that they were trying to get me to quit so they could avoid an unemployment insurance payout. It was time to play checkmate, and at this point, with my rights violated, I had the upper hand. They were a small company and didn't have an HR department. They often outsourced questions to the company lawyer in California. Because the laws were very different by state and his specialty was not employment claims, the lawyer's advising was very limited. While they weren't aware that cutting my hours by 46 hours a week, my employer just handed me the unemployment they were trying to avoid. In New Mexico, if your employer cuts you from full-time to part-time hours, they are responsible for providing an insurance payout to compensate the difference in wages temporarily. I knew this wasn't going to sit well with the arrogant director who thought him cutting my hours would be the shove I needed to exit the company. I patiently waited for them to receive my paperwork for my claim. They did, and boy, did the director let me know he was angry. The state was considering my claim should there be no attesting by the company. The director called me into his office requesting that we discuss my job duties. He emphasized how little work we had coming in and how financially inconvenient it had to be for me. He was so sympathetic to my situation and the anguish as a single mother it must be causing me. When I stated I didn't mind, I was more than happy to be there. My conditions of unemployment were that I had to comply to my employer's work schedule and duties, showing that I'm actively trying to be employed. This didn't sit well with him. His manipulation wasn't working as he planned. He then turned serious, as he casually mentioned my unemployment claim, and proceeds to pull out my documents requesting a response. He tries to convince me that if I proceed with my claim and receive payment, if at any point I am terminated for my performance, I would lose all source of income, unemployment and the company. He was trying to threaten me. I knew this wasn't true and called his bluff by informing him I wished to proceed. He stated to me that if I resigned right then and there, he would provide me a reference in the future moving forward. If you're terminated, you can't use them as a reference depending on the circumstances of termination. But if he fired me, as long as I was complying, I would then receive the full amount of unemployment. At this point, he realized his tactics to intimidate me weren't working and I wasn't budging. He tried to level with me and ask what was needed to get me to leave the company. I simply stated, fire me. Shocked, he asked, "Are you sure that's what you want?" And I reassured him. I walked out that afternoon with all my belongings and a letter of termination from my employer. I started receiving unemployment insurance the following week as he didn't contest my payouts. I had a new baby I was able to stay home with a year on my employer's tab. Story 20. Worked a job where I was the only one who knew how to take apart, clean, fix, and put all the equipment back together and do the weekly and monthly maintenance. Had a boss tell me one day that I was doing a poor job and not doing enough, and that anyone could do it. If I didn't step it up, you're gonna be fired, as they had the manuals for each piece of equipment. So that night I took apart all of the equipment, weekly and monthly stuff too, cleaned them, and then just left them apart. See if they could figure it out the next morning. Then I turned off my phone after getting home the entire day as I had the day off. When I turned it back on the next day, I saw that I had initially received angry texts ordering me to return and put everything back together. This lasted an hour. Then texts saying I risked being fired. Then texts begging me to return. Then more texts trying to compromise with OT. Then an apology. Before nothing else came for the rest of the day other than that the head boss wanted to see me as soon as I came in the next day. Came in the next day and over half the stuff was still not put together. And what had been put together was put together haphazardly and would need to be taken out again and then put back correctly. Was immediately asked to be seen by my boss and their boss to explain myself the moment I was seen entering. Once in the office, I told them that if they weren't there to apologize, then fire me. Or drop it and let me put all the stuff back together. They looked at each other and then told me I could get back to work. My boss never called me lazy again. I am baffled perpetually by the amount of stories in this thread where there are people who can do a very specific job and the bosses just don't see it. Where they have a very in-depth skill set and knowledge and whatever, and they're just not respected. At this point, the bosses get what they deserve, but I think they're doing them a favor by being like, you have one chance to make this right. But I guess quitting is not really in their best interest because then they're unemployed and whatever. What a weird situation employment is in general, huh? Story 21. First kitchen I worked in, they told me the more jobs I learned, the more I'd get paid. Came in basically knowing all of it anyway. 6 months later, I'd learned every job there except one spot. They told me if I learned that spot, I would get a raise. I told them I could find a new kitchen. I was easily one of the best employees there, and that I was told the more I learned, the more I would get paid. And I still haven't been given a raise. Head chef cracked and gave me a raise. I told him 50 cents wasn't enough. He was forced to give me another. 2 weeks after that, they fired the banquet chef's assistant. We had a lot of 300 plus people events, and told him to pick his new assistant. He immediately requested me. I told him, I needed another raise. I was told no again. Again, I said, I'll find a new job. Came in the next day and put my 2 weeks in. Yep, found a job that quick. Wound up making more money in that kitchen than anyone else beside the banquet chef and the head chef. That's how I wound up getting 3 raises in a month. Story 22. Wasn't physically at work, but it was on the phone. Day before, my mom is feeling bad, calling me at work and giving me updates. I finally convince her she needs to go to the ER, and I tell her to stay put and I'll be there soon to take her. Of course, she insisted that I stay at work, but whatever, that's my mom. I'm taking her to the frickin' ER. By the way, mom has history of bad health and issues and whatnot. I tell my direct manager I'm leaving, and she's like, fine, whatever, make up the hours, fine. And next day, my mom is still not great, but it's alright. I got her meds, but they still need to run other tests. So I decide to stay home with her and take care of her and run errands. Medical-related stuff. I call out, leaving a message with our customer service desk. But soon after, I get a call from a manager of a different department, we'll call her CM, asking why I called out. I tell her I need to take care of my mom. Oh, what's wrong with her? I'm sure she'll be fine at home. No. I left early yesterday to take her to the ER, and she's still weak. CM continues to try and convince me my mom is fine and I need to come in. I give in and tell her all the details. CM is unrelenting and finally finished with the cherry on top. I'm sure your mom would rather you have a job to come back to. Well, no, actually. You don't know my mom. You don't know her health. You don't know anything. I know you're a mom, so that's surprising as hell for you to say. I hope your children find themselves in that situation with a crap manager, and I hope they use the same ideals you're preaching. I answered her with, see, but I can go out and get another job. I can't go out and get another mom. I'm staying home today to take care of my mom. She said something about seeing me the next day in an attempt to end the convo and say bye. So I said, yeah, we'll see how she's doing. Said goodbye and hung up. Felt great because I'm normally a pushover, but not when it comes to my mom. I held firm and kept my composure, so she really couldn't say I was rude or anything either, but she was mad. Health should almost always be prioritized over work. OP's super right. You can find another job, and you won't find another mom. I understand it's inconvenient for the people at work, depending on what they're doing, obviously, but come on. Their mother was in the ER the day before, they have medical stuff to get done. You gotta give them a break. I'm sorry, your employees are not soulless. They do not only work for the company, they also have their own lives to lead. Which I guess could be said for 90% of the stories in this thread, maybe more. Anyway, I'm a voice actor, so I don't have my own stories for this, obviously. But if any of you do, then throw them in the comments. Sticking it to bad employers is definitely a guilty pleasure of mine. Love reading about it. For now, though, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.